William Holden.
Plum gentle.
Ryan O'Neal.
Ain't that just like a woman, though?
I said, you know what? You have an Academy Award, don't you? For Stalag 17. He said, yeah, I do. Where do you keep your Academy Award? And there's a long pause, and he said, it's in the Bay of Naples. I said, the Bay of Naples? You took it and you threw it into the Bay of Naples? He said, yeah. He said, I was sorry about it. The next day we were all diving for it.
Welcome to A Word on Westerns. Today, we are fortunate to have an actor who is an Oscar-nominated performer. He's been in many huge moneymakers, and he did a Western that is so special with William Holden. He's going to tell us about it. His name is Ryan O'Neal.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, pal. Well, I want to know.
I have nothing to say.
William Holden and Ryan O'Neal are the Wild Rovers.
That's a terrific film. Blake Edwards not only directed it, but he wrote it. He had started as a writer. He used to write on radio, The Richard Diamond Show, and the Peter Gunn, he created that and wrote a lot of scripts, but a Western, he must have loved doing that.
I remember I used to ride, because Blake got to take a helicopter, so we would go from location to location, and Bill and I would drive in his beautiful 600 Mercedes, and long drive, so I had time to ask him all about his career. And I remember asking him, I said, how many movies have you been in? And he said, 66. I said, is that 66 leading ladies? You had 66 leading ladies, and we're driving here by ourselves? And he said, well, some of them were my horses. I always liked that.
Hey, Ross, you busy?
What's up?
Well, nothing right now, so I think I'm gonna go play some poker.
I think I'll just stay right here.
He was a great horseback rider, too.
He was brilliant. Mm-hmm. He was brilliant. He wasn't kidding around, but he had started, well, I guess after Golden Boy, he was in Arizona, mm-hmm. and a lot of Westerns.
Right, he and Glenn Ford at Columbia did several films together.
He and Glenn Ford?
Yes.
He didn't mention Glenn. He told me that his name was Billy Beadle, and he was from Pasadena, California, and he had a contract that was split between Paramount and Columbia. I think they each paid him $50. And he got a call to go over to Columbia to meet with Harry Cohen about this movie that they were going to make called Golden Boy, a boxing story. A Broadway hit, by the way, for years with John Garfield. And but the publicist at Paramount said, Beadle, we can't use Beadle. We have to change your name. And he had a friend at the Los Angeles Times named Bill Holden, a sports writer. So he called Bill Holden and he said, we have an actor here and we'd like to use your name. And he said, well, can he act? And he said, we're going to find out. So that's how Bill Beadle became Bill Holden.
Yeah, he got the job, and I heard that Barbara Stanwyck took him under her wing and mentored him and helped him through that major film because he was a little nervous about a role of that size.
He sent her flowers for her birthday her entire life.
Mm-hmm. So she must have been helpful.
Every birthday, a dozen roses from Bill Holden.
Well, you are quite the film buff, too, I know.
I know who Henry Brandon is.
Yeah, well, and Henry Brandon, for those of you who don't know, Henry Brandon was Chief Scar and had been...
The Searchers.
In The Searchers, and had been a contract player at Hal Roach Studios. He played Indians several times.
Oh, many times. He was from Germany originally. His name was Brandenburg. And he was a friend of the family. He was a wonderful man, made me want to be an actor. If they were all like Henry, I wanted to be an actor.
What made it about him that gave him that stature, that presence, that made you
Well,
say,
he was 6'4".
Well, that helps.
And very handsome and funny and charming. And he just epitomized what I thought actors were like.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever talk to him about The Searchers?
Probably, but nothing to tell you.
Those are the stories.
Because he was
we
in
wanna
lots
hear.
of movies. You could talk to him about all kinds of different parts he had.
He had played in the Laurel and Hardy film Babes in Toyland. He was Silas, who wanted to take the Mother Hubbard's shoe away.
As a child, we've argued about this.
No, he's not as a child. He was young, but he was probably in his early 20s, and they put a big top hat on him. Everybody knows Henry Brandon from that film, right? Two people.
Two's enough.
Something that I'd like to know about, when you grew up in L.A.
Yeah. Didn't everyone? My father was a screenwriter. He wrote a Western, actually. He wrote Return of the Bad Men with Randolph Scott and Robert Ryan. In fact, he got all the bad guys from the Old West and put them in one gang for Randolph to take on.
That was a big hit, too. I think Lawrence Tierney might have been one of those bad guys in that film.
I hope not.
He was a bad guy.
He played my father in Tough Guys Don't Dance. I remember his, he had a photo, a fan photo that you have to give to people who would like it. His was the police dragging him towards a squad car. and he had blood all over the side of his face. I said, this is the picture that you give to your... He said, what's wrong with it? He was the brother of Scott Brady.
Yes.
And he did lots of Westerns.
Scott did, sure. Shotgun Slade. But Lawrence Tierney, he liked to cause tension wherever he went, I think.
He was sober by the time I got him. So he was calmer. He was a little calmer, yeah.
There was a show that I watched growing up called The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis. And
I got my Screen Actors Guild card doing that.
Well, and Robbie and I watched that episode just yesterday.
Oh, I hope not.
We did, and part of what made it appealing to me as a kid who is a teenager was the same thing that made it appeal to Robbie and me again last night, is that luscious, creamy Tuesday Weld.
I worked with in that show with Les Brown Jr. Les Brown Jr. was my partner in it, and so was Marlo Thomas. She is also in that episode. Perhaps you don't recognize her because she had a nose just like her dad.
That's right. I saw that and I'm going, this girl is really familiar.
She was a kind of aloof too. I remember I was hoping for nice, warm, friendly people. And just Les Brown Jr.
Well,
who I went to high school with. I had known him for some time. But I was in the Virginian. I did a Virginia with Lloyd Nolan and Chris Robinson and Two Faces West.
Two Faces West.
I was in that for Screen Gems.
That's a good one.
And I worked with Charlie Bronson on a series called Empire. I learned a great deal about the business from Charles and Bronson.
And Empire was a series that predated Dallas as a modern-day Western. Richard Egan, Terry Moore, Charlie Bronson. What a great
Warren
cast.
Vanders, Ann Seymour. Yeah. I want to tell you a story about Bill Holden. So we're working on Wild Rovers. We're in Kanab, Utah.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. And the nominations came in. And I'm on it. I'm nominated for Best Actor. I couldn't believe it. But so was George C. Scott for Patton. So I didn't hold up much hope, and then I kind of poo-pooed the whole thing. And Bill Holden said, he scolded me. He said, no, you can't do that. This is your peers who voted you, and you are. I said, you know what? You have an Academy Award, don't you? For Stalag 17. He said, yeah, I do. And I said, and you have a home in Hong Kong, and you have a home in London, and you have in Africa, East Africa, you have the Africa Safari Club, and you have a place in Palm Springs. Where do you keep your Academy Award? And there's a long pause, and he said, "It's in the Bay of Naples." I said, "The Bay of Naples? You took it and you threw it into the Bay of Naples?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "I was sorry about it. The next day we were all diving for it, but we never found it. We never found it."
Oh, I didn't know that.
I said, "Well, if I win, I'm not throwing mine anywhere."
And that nomination was for Love Story.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Love Story.
Well, and speaking of a Love Story and Ali McGraw, you and Ali have been touring with Love Letters, I think.
Yes, we have.
I'll bet that's fun.
She still keeps her hotel room door locked. What could I do?
Steve McQueen, I think, broke it down one time.
More than once.
Well, in that movie, The Wild Rovers, I know that always Blake Edwards had Henry Mancini score the films, and Hank was involved in another movie, and he had Jerry Goldsmith, who had scored Chinatown and Planet of the Apes, do the score for the film, which is a terrific soundtrack to that.
Well, you know, that's after we finished the production, the music comes in, so I was surprised when I heard it, actually. Because Henry Mancini was my neighbor, and I said, "What happened to you, Henry?"
He was a busy boy.
Yeah.
Joe Don Baker and Tom Skerritt played Carl Malden's sons who were chasing you.
If the sheriff has to stop, then you keep right on going and bring those cowboys back, you understand?
Dead or alive?
Alive, of course. That is, if they give you that choice.
A great cast.
And, you know, I thought I was a pretty good writer, but they gave me a mule to ride in the movie. That was a story point. They're not as easy to ride, mules. In fact, they're almost impossible. So I was getting bucked off all the time. And luckily it was winter and it was snow, so you landed soft.
Your relationship with Peter Bogdanovich generated 3 really wonderful, timeless movies. What's Up, Doc was one of the great, it's a classic movie, just like Bringing Up Baby.
And this is Ryan O'Neal. You remember him from Love Story and Peyton Place and Games, and The Big Bounce was one of his bigger hits. Also a Miss Barbara Streisand over here. You remember her from Funny Face? Excuse me, Funny Girl.
Paper Moon. I watched that again last night.
They were singing it, the song.
Yes.
They sang the song.
I wonder why they picked that.
Oh,
and
setup.
And Nickelodeon, that was the history of early filmmaking in Hollywood. Great.
Thank you.
Somebody had emailed me and reminded me that there was a series that I had watched and I loved it, that Kirk Douglas produced, Tales of the Vikings. And we've heard that you were in that and shot in Scandinavia.
I was in about 30 of them.
Wow.
I was a Lichtdubel. I was the stand-in, Lichtdubel German. We shot it in Munich for Jerome Cortland.
Who was the lead?
Who was the leading man, and he was 6'6", so I had to wear these big blocks on my shoes so that I could stand in for him. But that's how I got my start, actually.
And did you have any roles in
Yes, I did.
Too?
Firebeard's dragon ship, we can give chase. I still have it stuck here.
I'd love to see those. Do you have any of those?
No, I don't know what happened to it, actually. It was a syndicated series for Bryna Productions.
Kirk Douglas.
And they had all the costumes, and they had the long ships, and they had a village on a lake outside in Bavaria. So when they finished the movie, they thought, why not do a TV series? We have all these costumes and these boats. And so that's how that came to.
Great production values. The movie.
Buddy Bear was in it, and a wonderful actor named Walter Barnes, who had played for the Philadelphia Eagles first before he was an actor.
And he went to Italy and made a lot of spaghetti westerns.
He sure did.
That.
He
Yeah.
sure did. He stayed in Europe and I got lots of work.
From out of the north, like an icy wind, swept Odin's for warrior breed. With broad axe and spear, they followed a star, adventure and glory their need. They conquered the seas in their dragon ships, fought bravely on many a land. For battle remains right down for the man who dies with a sword in his hand. The Vikings, the Vikings, the Vikings, take well in the Highlands.
Another show that you did was PEYTON Place. It ran for 5 years. You did
Just 500
Yeah,
episodes.
500 episodes. Of PEYTON
Drew the
Place.
line at 500.
That's enough. Well, that show was so popular, it was on Tuesday nights and Thursday nights, as I recall.
And before you were born, it was on 3 nights a week. They added a night. It was so successful, they added an additional half hour.
So when it first premiered, it was only on once a week?
No, it was always twice. And then after 2 years, they added an episode. We were on 3 times a week. So the actors were always going back and forth, looking at their lines, wondering, where are you going? He said, I don't know, I'm going to...
Yeah, one of the great actresses, she did terrific Westerns. Dorothy Malone was in that series as well, one of the
Good
leads.
woman, very decent woman, for sure. I had no idea that she had such a wonderful career. I would have asked her more questions.
She was an Oscar winner.
Because she never talked about it. She was very,
well, a great actress.
Shy, she was shy. But also Mia Farrow. Can't forget about Mia. She was breathtaking, to tell you the truth. I'd never seen anyone like her.
Now, in the middle of the show, isn't that when she cut her hair so short?
Well, yeah, she did. She did. They claimed it was because she didn't get invited to Frank Sinatra's 50th wedding anniversary. 50th birthday. But
wow, glad we cleared that up.
Birthday, it was his birthday. But she said, I asked her, I said, because of his birthday, you cut all your hair off? Because she did it, they did the master with her hair down to her waist, and then in the close-ups, there was no hair anymore. So they had to reshoot everything. And she claimed that she saw Barbara Parkins in the hairdresser. She was combing her hair, and then looking at it, and then combing it forward, and like this, and combing, and she's watching. And she said, how important is hair in life? And she opened a drawer, and in the drawer was a pair of pinking shears. That's all she needed. She cut it herself.
Well, Ryan, I want to thank you for joining us today. Yes, you are.
Well, is there lunch?
There's going to be lunch. There is lunch following this, but you're not done. One more question then.
Sure. I'll tell you anything.
All right. When you were growing up,
Yeah.
Westerns.
Yeah.
I was so influenced by them, and so were so many of the people here today. Did you have favorite Western stars?
Jimmy Stewart and Winchester 73.
Wasn't that a great film?
Yeah.
Anthony Mann.
And of course, my dad's movie. I remember when it opened, he took all the kids in the neighborhood. We climbed in the car and we drove to see it. Westerns were wonderful. There was no, that's what you wanted to see were Westerns. And they had tripwires. There were things that get done to the animals in those days that you wouldn't want to do today.
That you're not allowed to do today.
And you're not allowed. They have somebody on the set always. But we had wonderful stuntmen in those days, too. And my favorite actors were like Whip Wilson and Lash LaRue. Yeah. And I saw Gene Autry. I went to now you go to rock concerts. Well, in those days, you went to see your favorite cowboy actor. He would be on stage, he'd sing a few songs, I remember his horse had guns for their bite,
In the bit.
I thought that was amazing. He'd always reach for one of those if he needs it. And I was about 6, but there was Gene Autry.
Pretty fancy. And now here you are at the Autry Museum.
And my son works for the Angels. He's
Really?
a broadcaster for Fox, but his job is for the Los Angeles Angels, which was Gene's team.
His real love.
Yeah.
Well, we love Westerns, and we love having you here, Ryan.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you. That's it.
I'll just stay here.
Again. Okay, now get off the stage.
Okay. Thank you. He wants it back.
All right, I do.
The Cowboys was a short-lived TV series that was based on the movie. You do a TV series about these boys, cattle drives, and of course they brought 5 or 6 of the young boys back from the movie into the TV series, and I played the role of Steve, and I was in junior high school, and it honestly was a little bittersweet. And I started working on the Cowboys, and it was a poor role. It was 1 or 2 lines in each episode. It was the first time in my life where I was on a movie set and said, you know, I really don't want to be here.
Hi, I'm Rob Weld. Welcome to A Word on Westerns. We do love Westerns here, and we've got somebody special here today who started as, well, it's not Terror of Tiny Town, but it was on the Andy Griffith Show where he made his debut as Messy Leon. He went on to do like 300 other movies. This is a working character actor. You know him, you love him. Clint Howard, give him a big hand.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I listened to your book that you and your brother wrote, and I just loved it. There's emotion in it, there's laughter, a lot of laughs, and some tough times too.
Well, yeah, it was Ron and I, thank you very much, Rob. Ron and I wanted to be honest. We felt like that was the only policy that we could travel down. Mm-hmm. We didn't have a lot of salacious situations in our childhood that you know, the show business gave us. So, you know, it just, I don't know, wanting to stay along that honest path was important to us. And I'll tell you what, it really was a love letter to Mom and Dad. My dad, Rance Howard, and my mom, Jean Howard, were both people that were so special that writing a book about them and writing a book about what they gave us really is short. I mean, well, what Dad gave me especially, I'll just speak personally, my dad was just such a wonderful, wonderful man. And as I look back, a genius human being, mm-hmm. you know, because he was able to guide his boys, hence the name of the book, The Boys. He was able to guide his boys through some very, very tricky waters.
Well, and it was unusual for him. I know that he wanted to be a cowboy star. And suddenly that didn't happen. He was one of the most prolific character actors around, but he had 2 really qualified sons, and he must have been just a giant help for you guys. But what was it like for him then to not be that cowboy star?
Well, I'll tell you what, you know, he didn't talk about it much, mm-hmm. but nobody breaks into show business to do a couple of lines, mm-hmm. you know. When he got bit by the show, when my dad got bit by the show business bug, he was 12 years old, and he just saw that connection between the audience. He felt the connection between the audience and himself, and that's what he wanted, mm-hmm. and that's what his dream was. He didn't want to be a farmer. He was raised on a farm. He was born on a farm. He was the first son of a farmer. And the expectation was that my dad was gonna be a farmer. And yet, when my dad hatched this dream in his brain and in his soul that he wanted something else, his parents, especially his mother, encouraged him to go for it. And on his journey, on my dad's journey, he ended up at the University of Oklahoma, and that's where he met my mom. And oddly enough, a fellow named Dennis Weaver was the fellow that introduced my mom and dad to each other. Dennis was an upper division student at OU at the time. He had come from Kentucky, and he was an upper division drama student, and he was running a scene study class. And my dad was a sophomore with no real credits. I mean, my dad didn't really go to college. He went there to pursue show business. And my mom went to college, and she was an ingenue, and anyway, Dennis matched him up in a scene study, and sparks flew. Now, Mom and Dad never gave us those details of those sparks, mind you. Our family was certainly PG, unless, of course, my dad was talking about agents, which once in a while it would become a little more than PG. But my dad was a working actor and loved to work and pursued acting until literally the day he fell ill. My dad was 88 years old and was working on a movie called Appleseed, which, by the way, is now available on Blu-ray, and my dad is the lead in the movie.
I want to feel that I have righted a wrong.
And you haven't forgiven yourself yet?
Life is full of little plums. Some you get to keep, some you got to throw back.
And I play his son, and I have a very small scene at the end of the movie. It's not a small scene, but it's, he's throughout the movie. My dad was an actor, always an actor. Now, he was also, first and foremost, a father. And when Ron came along, and then when I came along, his priority was his family, his children, his wife, and then his business. So he never gave up wanting to be an actor. He also was a writer. He also, did writing. He wrote episodes for the Flintstones. He did episodes for the Rookies. He did episodes for the Andy Griffith Show. He wrote numerous episodes for Gentle Ben. Once the people down in Florida, and Ivan Tors and Andy White, recognized my dad had an aptitude for writing, especially in the second season of Gentle Ben, my dad wrote like 5 or 6 episodes. So anyway, he didn't give it up. What he did is what a brilliant man, what a brilliant genius human being. His priorities stayed true. One thing about my dad is nothing ever intimidated him. He could be around some of the biggest people in show business, and he didn't act like a bully. It wasn't the Rance Howard way or the highway, but he would not let show business intoxicate him or intimidate him. And as he guided Ron and I through these very tricky waters, he did it with it was beautiful.
He was able to have roles in different series, and to reunite with Dennis Weaver, that must have been special for him.
Oh yeah, that was. I mean, Mom and Dad always were close with Dennis Weaver and his wife, Jerry. Dennis, very similar guy, salt of the earth human being. At first, I got cast in a movie called Gentle Giant, which was basically, what it ended up being was a pilot for the TV series Gentle Ben. And, I got hired. I auditioned and got hired. And sure enough, Dennis Weaver was playing my father. Vera Miles was also in the movie. And Vera Miles and our family crossed paths a number of times in our lives. And Vera, a wonderful, wonderful human being herself. Anyway, that Dennis decided to do the TV series. And Vera Miles didn't want to have anything to do with television. She was of that, she worked for friggin' John Ford, for crying out.
The Searchers, come on.
So Dennis, went down to Florida, and with his family, with Jerry, was there often, and his kids were around. And for a couple of years, we worked on Gentle Ben together.
Get in the winner's circle with Gentle Ben this fall. Here are action and adventure in the Everglades. Here are the people who love the wilderness and its way of life. Join them each Sunday for the new hit, Gentle Ben, in color starting this fall.
And Dad and Dennis were lockstep in wanting to deliver quality entertainment, which was this story about a boy and a bear and a family in the Florida Everglades. At first, I know we're jumping around a little bit, but we're going to talk about Gentle Ben. At first, Ivan Tors had designed the show to where the bear talked.
Glad that didn't happen.
I swear, Open up, episode 3, look down, and wait, what is this? Ben's got dialogue? and my dad and Dennis, they stopped. They dropped anchor right there.
If Ivan Torres was alive today, you'd be making the Cocaine Bear.
I'm not sure what Ivan would be doing now.
Now, he already had a big studio set up in Florida for Flipper.
Ivan Torres was a prolific man. Started as a science fiction writer in the 50s and produced movies. And Ivan Torres was one of the first syndicators of regular television programming. Ivan Torres understood what syndication meant. I think first was Sea Hunt. So he did Sea Hunt, Autry, Cowboy in Africa. Flipper is what really made him. And they made a couple of Flipper movies. So Flipper was sort of his anchor, and then Gentlemen came along. And I remember one year, Gentlemen and Flipper were shooting simultaneously, and I never jumped in the water with the dolphins. They always discouraged that, but I got to pet the Flippers.
Did Luke Halpin come over and pet the bear?
I don't know. I'm not sure whether we would see each other once in a while. Listen, you also got to understand back in those days, we were working fast. Gentle Ben, we would shoot an episode of Gentle Ben in 3 days. We were doing 10 pages a day. And so we had, Dad and I put on our work shoes every day and went to work. Now, I was never abused, but I worked hard. And, back in those days, the state of California did not have jurisdiction in Florida, and the work laws for children were different. The series Gentle Ben was not handcuffed by the child labor laws. So I was able to go and work. If I needed to work 11 hours, as Dad, listen, Dad loved me, and Dad, I was never abused, but I would work hard and go home and sleep and get up and go to work. I was the star of the show.
Was it, and you were great in those too.
Thank you.
The feature films, though, were a lot different, and the Wild Country, and Robert Totten directed that. What a fabulous, underappreciated director he is. He really knew how to make Westerns like nobody else.
I'll tell you, Bob Totten was like the uncle that was truly around and helped me get through life. I'll tell you another thing that just popped into my head. It was Bob Totten that really inspired a fellow named Ron Howard to be a director.
How did he do that?
Well, on The Wild Country, which was a movie that Bob Totten directed, it was a good movie. Didn't get much play. Disney was sort of not in a position that they are today, and the movie came and went. But anyway, Totten directed it. Totten was a fiery man that loved Westerns, and he lived and breathed Westerns, and we drew very close, and our families drew close. And Ron was just beginning to get the fire to be a director. Didn't know how to do it. He had a little camera that he would shoot little home movies with, but he didn't really know anything. And it was Totten that really, he called Ron out a couple of times. Because one time Ron showed him a little Super 8 film that he had made. And Totten said, "Well, that's good, Howard, but when are you going to make a real picture?" Totten was like that. Totten would challenge you. Totten was a beautiful guy, and I loved him dearly. And he died too soon. He had an opportunity to make the Sackets, and he loved Westerns.
The Sackets is fabulous, but you did a Gunsmoke with him that Jack Elam was in that too.
Yes, he hired me. Totten chose me to be in an episode of the Gunsmoke. I remember I lit fire. What I remember about that episode is I lit firecrackers under Festus's chair when he was sleeping. And the whole joke is he didn't flinch. The string of firecrackers went off and he didn't flinch. And I was, as a boy there in the town, I was completely disappointed that I couldn't rattle him. But I'll tell you what Totten did for me was he hired me to be in a movie called The Red Pony, which was Hank Fonda and Maureen O'Hara and Jack Elam and Ben Johnson and Richard Jekyll. And I played Jody, which was the lead character in Steinbeck's novel. Now they adjusted Steinbeck's novella, and Totten and a guy named Ron Bishop wrote the screenplay, and it was more about a boy battling his father. and coming of age with his father, and I got to work with Hank Fonda.
What was that like working with him?
I'll tell you what, to be honest, Rob, it was very cool. Because I'll tell you what, Hank was very method. He didn't make a big deal about it, but you know, Jody and Carl Tiflin did not have a good relationship. You know, now I might be able to horse around with Bob Totten and horse around with my dad and horse around with the prop man, but there was no way that Hank was going to let me horse around with him. That was just a very standoffish relationship I had with him.
Was it to keep his character?
Sure. He didn't want to have any sense of anything with me, and he didn't want me to have any sense with him. It needed to be standoffish. It wasn't until we wrapped that I felt the warmth of Hank. And here's another one. Talk about, what is it, 7 degrees of separation or whatever. My dad's first real break in the business was back a long time ago, probably, I don't know, in the early 50s, in the Broadway production of Mr. Roberts. And my dad auditioned for Pulver, didn't quite get it, but the director, Josh Logan, thought Dad was so good and came up this short that he gave him a part in the ensemble. He played a character named Lindstrom, which, you know, nowadays you can understand why Mr. Roberts was a big hit, because it was about 15 well-cut actors with their shirts off walking around the Broadway stage. That's going to be a hit for everybody, you know?
Worked for hair.
So anyway, my dad was on that production, and John Forsythe was playing the Mr. Roberts, and then Hank Fonda replaced him. And my dad and Hank got to know each other. So, and another little side mark, when my brother was 16 years old, he got cast in a TV series called The Smith Family. And Hank Fonda was taking some of that TV money, and he was the star of The Smith Family. And it didn't work. He played a detective, and the show was on for one season. And then, like most television shows, they come and go. And I'll tell you what, I said that Bob Totten was an inspiration for my brother to be a director. It was also Hank Fonda. By this point, Ron had worked with Totten, and then he had gotten in this position where he was no longer a child actor, and what he really wanted to do was be a TV director. And Hank Fonda was saying, "Yes, you can do it, Ron." You know. Now, here's another thing. You know, Ron went from Ronnie to Ron. And that was an interesting, you know, that was an interesting situation, because at first, you know, Ronnie wanted to be Ron with 2 N's. You know, the rebel. But he ended up landing on Ron. And you know, listen, I love my brother. I love him dearly. He's still working really hard. Mm-hmm. He's directing a movie now. And I'm a little irritated because I'm not hired.
Then he usually puts you in his films.
You know, Ron and I have had many, many conversations and many experiences about this. You know, he trusts me, mm-hmm. and he's the chief, you know. He's the guy in charge. He's chief of the boat. And as an actor, I just work on the boat. And when he chooses to put me on the boat, you know, we have great chemistry. And I love working with him. It's wonderful. I mean, like, for instance, on The Missing.
Yes, you and your dad had a nice scene together, but you were so perfect and strong as the sheriff. He says, "I'm not going out of town hunting these Indians. I got people in town."
Yeah. Well, it was The Missing is a wonderful little movie. Mm-hmm. It isn't one of my brother's big box office hits.
But it's a good one.
It's a good Western. And I play the Sheriff Purdy from Chloride, New Mexico. And I channeled my aunt, and Ron and I talked about the voice that I was going to do. I can do the voice a little bit. Let me say, no, I probably can. It's been a long time. But I played this sheriff, and I was this small town was becoming modernized, and I really didn't want to mess with the Indians. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that was that experience.
But it was a nice moment, and to have your dad in it too was great. So your first cowboy role was on the Andy Griffith Show. It was Little Leon, Messy Leon, they called him.
Little Leon.
How did that happen?
I was on one of those occasions that my dad had an acting job. You know, my dad would normally watch the boys, watch us. Mm-hmm. He was our guru, our mentor. Mom would come to the set when necessary, and she was very capable of being on the set and handling herself and handling us, but that was normally something that Dad did. But Dad was away one day, and Mom had to take me down to the set while she watched Ron, and Bob Sweeney, the director of the Andy Griffith Show at the time, he directed most of the episodes. He saw me and he thought of a wonderful bit I could do to help an episode. And they put me in the episode, and it was a funny little bit shot in December of 1961. And I worked on it, and I've been working ever since. You know? Yeah.
You know, I look at like Charles King's filmography, hundreds and hundreds of films, and then I look at yours and hundreds of films and TV shows.
You know, don't say no. It's a big secret to working a long time in the business. Listen, if you counted up 63 years, you know, 5 or 6 jobs a year, that list is going to mount up really fast. And there were some years when I worked 10 or 12 times, considering what Ron and I did starting, you know, for Ron in 1961 and starting for me, you know, I worked in the early 60s from Laredo to Gunsmoke to a couple episodes of The Virginian, Men from Shiloh, Lancer.
You had some good stuff with Doug McClure, too, in those.
Yes. Oh, I did an episode of The Virginian with Doug McClure that's awesome. I mean, that show, it would never happen now. But here I was a little kid in this show shooting at Doug McClure with a .22 single shot at close range. I don't think programs and practices lets that happen today.
They wouldn't do that.
No.
But, I need to ask you about the Cowboys TV series. Sure. It was such a wonderful movie, and they put a lot of the kids, A. Martinez and Bobby Carradine, in that series.
Clay O'Brien, World Championship
rodeo star.
Yeah,
for sure. And you got lucky to be in that, but it was only a half an hour, and it failed. And nobody can see those.
That wasn't luck, Rob. That was Bob Totten.
What happened?
Bob Totten was hired to do the pilot of The Cowboys. The Cowboys was a short-lived TV series that was based on the movie. John Wayne died. First time in any film, John Wayne had died in a movie. And then somebody had got the idea, well, you carry on and you do a movie, you do a TV series about these boys, cattle drives.
Jim Davis took Duke's place.
And Moses Gunn was in it. He was in the movie. And of course, they brought 5 or 6 of the young boys back from the movie into the TV series. But Bob Totten got hired to direct the pilot, and casting happened, and Barry Diller at the time was the president of the network of ABC, and they had gone through an arduous task of casting, and I played the role of Steve, and I was in junior high school, and it honestly was a little bittersweet because Totten had hired me, and I was really excited to be working on this TV series, and I had been in the Red Pony, a certain amount of notoriety and a certain amount of self-esteem, and I started working on the Cowboys, and it was a poor role. It was 1 or 2 lines in each episode.
Because there were so many kids.
There were so many kids. I get it. They weren't trying to cut me out or anything. It was. And
Bob directed the pilot, though.
Yes, Bob directed the pilot, and then he was let go. He didn't have anything to do with the TV series. But I'll tell you what, I was 14 years old, and I really wanted to go to school. It was the first time in my life where I was on a movie set and said, I really don't want to be here. I want to be somewhere. I want to be in high school. I want to be with my buddies. But I was in journalism, and I was voted, or I'd won the job of being the yearbook editor for the junior high school yearbook. And yet when I got the part of working on the Cowboys, I had to give up that job of being the yearbook editor. And it was, like I said, it was bittersweet. I've always loved to work, and it doesn't matter. The cards got shuffled and dealt, and that was the hand, and everything is fine.
Well, Westerns seem to be coming back, and you just did one with Nicolas Cage, The Old Way.
Yes, I did. I had a wonderful opportunity to work with Nick Cage and Ryan Kira Armstrong, Nick Searcy. It's a little Western, harkens back to the B Western. First of all, I wouldn't consider it a B movie. It's just a small little Western. It was Nick Cage's first Western. And it was a wonderful experience, shot in Montana. It was really beautiful. I went up there with my wife, Kat, and our daughter, Rafa, and for 3 weeks we were in we were in literally God's country, just north of Yellowstone National Park in like the late summer, early fall.
You should have bought some property up there. It's so great.
Well, yeah, you know, that land race has been won by a lot of people who sit next to Bezos at the dinner table. You know, but it was beautiful, beautiful country. And listen, I love Westerns. I wish more got made. I love playing this character Eustace. I love putting on that face. I love going back and creating. He was a Civil War veteran where things didn't turn out real well, and he ended up in prison, and he ended up running around with some bad people. But he wasn't a bad guy. So, you know, I pieced together kind of a backstory for Eustace, and it was fun to do.
A nice character, and Westerns are fun to do, and your book is fun too, and I want everybody to run out and get The Boys, and the book is a good read, but to have the audio version where he reads a chapter and Ron reads a chapter, Ron with one N, and it's just terrific. A lot of heart, and your journalism studies paid off.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Rob. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I would encourage people, listen, we're real proud of it, and it is a really unique journey.
But I want to thank you for coming in and making the time to share your stories with all of us today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you very much.